Welcome to the Emerging Civil War podcast. I'm Chris Mikowski, and joining me from the great, most famous little small town in America is my friend, Gettysburg licensed battlefield guy, Jim Hessler. Hello.
Hello, Chris. Thanks for the invite. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
I'm delighted to have you with us. I'll just fess up to everybody right up front. I've got a huge man crush on Jim Hessler. He's just one of the most entertaining and thought-provoking people working in the field today. And so this is a real treat to have you with us.
Well, to find out that a giant in the industry such as yourself has a man crush on me is beyond words. But remember, I'm into Sickles, I'm into Custer, I'm the Yankee who drafted Sherman in the American Battlefield Trust fantasy draft. So
Yeah.
people dislike me, north, south, east, west. Everybody can find a reason to hate me. So maybe you shouldn't crush on me too hard. It might not
Oh
be
no!
good
I
for
mean,
your
see,
career.
always keeping people guessing. You don't want to get pigeonholed,
That's
right?
exactly it.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
exactly it. Make it
So
make him wonder what's he going to do to piss us off tonight, right?
yeah, right.
Yeah.
So you've got sort of like the Civil War facial hair going on there. Is that inspired by anyone in particular?
I always have this going on.
Well, I
Oh, by the
know,
way,
but I mean, it's a good look.
well, thanks, but I mean, I've like had it forever. And by the
Oh,
way,
I know.
I'm taking my wife's name off of here. I'm going to rename myself just so people aren't confused.
Behind every good man is a good woman,
Oh,
and
absolutely. And my wife Michelle, I'll give a nice shout out to. But I don't want people watching this, on YouTube and thinking, oh, that Michelle Hessler was great. I need to go buy her book. That could be a problem, right?
well, I don't know. The money, if it works in your house the same way it does in my house, buy the book, it goes
Exactly.
into her bank account anyway.
Yeah, that's true. That's
Yeah.
true.
So I want to start since we're podcasting tonight. I want to start with your podcast. You're co-host
Hmm.
of a fantastic podcast, Battle of Gettysburg podcast. And so let's just start. How did you get sucked into the world of podcasting to begin with?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for the shout out. It was geez, I guess now it was probably 2018, 2019. I think we're in our fourth or fifth year. And my co-host Eric Lindblade. Eric and I have known each other for a long time. Probably since he moved to town 10, 15 years ago. I forget how long it's been. So we knew each other for a long time. We had comfort level kind of talking. And when you know somebody for a long time, you kind of catch up on the same buzzwords and phrases. And as it turned out, we both had crushes on Nature Boy Ric Flair kind of stuff. So we kind of had that going. And I think as this podcast craze was taken off with all the kids kind of thing, we sort of had some offline conversations around, maybe we should do that sometime. And I kind of took it like, yeah, we'll get to it eventually. And all of a sudden, like one day, Eric is like, hey, I bought all the equipment. When are we going to start doing this? So then I said, okay, because I'm still going to work on an escape hatch in case I don't want to do this. I said, well, you know what, Eric, let's do 6. And if nobody's listening and we're not having any fun, we can at least say we tried. And well, needless to say, neither one of those scenarios happened. And here we are 4.5 years later, still podcasting, folks, for all the digital content creators out there, right? So
Well, and that's such a different way of looking at it from the old school historian. We're going to be in the archives. We're going to write books.
mhm.
Whole different way of delivery. What do you like about it?
Well, that's a great point. And it took me a little getting used to. Obviously Eric and I've been a battlefield tour guide at Gettysburg, as you probably know, for 20 odd years. But it took me a little bit to get rid of that mental baggage around writing books. Well, if we're not writing books, we're not real historians. It did take me a little bit to get away from that and realize. And one of the good things we've had from this experience is I no longer have this sort of doom and gloom mentality about the future of Civil War history. Because let's face it, we were all like, oh, everybody in this field is 70 years old, and when they die, nobody's going to be left, kind of thing. And what being in the digital space, like I keep using these buzzwords.
The scarecrows are great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Being in the digital space makes you realize, okay, there are younger people out there. Now in this field, younger is sort of like 35 to 50, but there is at least another generation of people out there that that are interested in the same stuff we have. And that's been the best part of the podcasting experience, is meeting and getting to know some of these people.
When you talk about that, the demographics, one of the things that Drew Gruber with Civil War Trails likes to talk about is there are plenty of people interested in the Civil War. They're just engaging it in different ways.
Yeah.
And so when you talk about that shift in mindset from the books to this digital space, here, let me use the scarecrow, the digital space.
That's my line, mister.
That's Jim's line. It really is. It opens up a whole nother group of people who are engaging this in different sorts of ways.
It does, and you know this well. I mean, you're a man of many mediums here, and like, I think we both try to put as many eggs in different baskets as we can. Of course, the danger is, right, people can get in front of a camera and with a microphone and say anything. And the danger is, you see some things in social media or people making on videos, and you sit there and you go, ooh, I'd like to check the footnote on that statement, sort of thing. So it's still dangerous. I would encourage younger people who hopefully are watching tonight or listening tonight, if you're kind of like, hey man, I'm too young to go to Civil War roundtable meetings, I'd encourage you to get out and go to those meetings, because part of this is still about the human interaction and meeting people who like the same stuff. So please don't just turn this into, well, I'm going to sit in my darkened apartment with my curtains drawn, just watching Mikowski on YouTube all day. Get out there and meet people, and that's part of the reward of it too.
And it seems to me that, part of this particular format is entertainment, and it's not necessarily like education so much as it's just entertainment, the same way that people will watch sports commentators, and they'll armchair quarterback. Well, we're armchair generaling, and it's the same sort of thing. And that is a different experience than, reading the books or being in the resources and the primary sources, or as you say, talking with other folks. This is kind of a one-way conversation where people are listening to us but don't get to be part of that conversation.
Yeah, well, until they get into the YouTube comments, like, oh, this was the worst conversation I ever watched. What were these idiots thinking? Right. That's when they get into the conversation, and there's times with that where, that could be not fun either as well.
Yeah. But one of the things that I think that was so successful about your podcast, though, is, and maybe this ties back to your original skepticism, was, capturing that lightning in the bottle. Jim Hessler on the Battlefield is a one-man show, super entertaining, and to kind of capture that spirit and ambiance digitally, how do you replicate that? But I think it's translated really well for you.
Well, I appreciate that. The ambiance of Jim Hessler. I've never thought of that before. Yeah, I think like I've been talking all week, and I'm actually kind of a little bit hoarse tonight. There's still that ambiance of being out there live and using the battlefield as your prop, your classroom, whatever you want to call it, right? And it's still a challenge in an audio only format like a podcast, or even what we're doing tonight, audio video, for your YouTube, but it's still just two guys sitting here talking to each other. You're right. Yeah. I feel like, and maybe you feel differently, but I feel like in a way you got to work twice as hard when you're on the microphone, because you don't have that battlefield, to fall back on. It's just you, and, you're going to stand or fall kind of based on your own merits.
I think the interaction you have with Eric also livens that up too. Tell me a little bit about that relationship.
Yeah. Well, go back to what I was saying at the outset. It helps that, we've known each other for a long time. And it's funny because we'll get comments like, Jim sounds angry every time Eric brings up wrestling, do stuff like that. Well, first of all, sounding angry is just my natural state. So it doesn't matter if we're talking about wrestling, the Civil War books, or, the Equalizer, wink, wink. It doesn't, right? It doesn't really matter. So, because we've known each other for a long time, we kind of know what the hot buttons are, and some of the way we think about stuff, and, whether it's pro wrestling. And I keep bringing that up because that's kind of one of the gimmicks that we do on the podcast, or Gettysburg. I think it's a good relationship. We try to banter. I think any podcast benefits from having more than one person on the microphone. Somebody sometimes says, "Oh, Eric sounded too angry," or "Jim talks too much," or something like that. But that's part of the banter. And when we're on mic with each other, we don't even notice any of that stuff, right? And and again, you do all this stuff too. I'm sure you have the same experiences.
So as soon as you start talking about pro wrestling, all I could think of was Slovenia is running wild. I got the guns. We're out here on the battlefield. It's like,
Yeah. Well, we're the thing too is we're both sort of fans of the same era of wrestling. Like again, this is there's a term in wrestling called kayfabe, which is an old school term. You nodded, maybe you know what I'm talking about. Some of what we do on the show is a little bit of that. Like I have a term like where I get my jimmies rustled. And that was a phrase that a mutual friend had said one time, don't get your jimmies rustled. And I kind of filed that away. And one day on microphone, I just kind of spit that out. My jimmies don't really get rustled over half the stuff that I pretend they are. But for the wrestling thing, I haven't watched pro wrestling in probably 35 years. So all the references that I'm making, whether it's on the podcast or on social media, go back to like 1985 or something like
yeah.
that.
Captain Lou Albano and
Yeah. Oh,
Jimmy
yeah,
by
exactly.
Snuka.
Ric Flair, Superfly, Snuka, Ricky Steamboat. That's my generation, folks. That's my Civil War, right?
So how has the podcast helped you better understand Gettysburg?
Mm, that's a good question. It's definitely helped me understand the people who are coming to Gettysburg
Okay.
better, right? Right. Because, again, tour guide, you're with people for a couple of hours, and then you get out of the car or you move on to the next tour, or, they go on to Hershey Park or whatever. And
Hershey Park
uh,
Happy.
yeah, right. So I think people that I've met and I've continued relationships because of podcasting, and then that translates over into social media, right? You hook up with them because of the podcast. Next thing you know, they're Facebook friends, and my God, now you're seeing all the issues they have in their life with maybe you do or you don't want to know about. But so there's that aspect of it. You get to know the people better. It is as far as understanding the battle, I think, because this is a really good question. I think for me, when we open it up to questions from people, from listeners and from the audience, again, you take questions on tours, but this is a different medium. And I think when you open it up to questions from people, it can kind of be like, oh, okay. Well, I was talking about this, and clearly they're interested in this, and it helps make you realize, okay, what are people really interested in? And it may not be the same thing that you've just been monologuing about for the last hour and a half. And I think that helps. It's a different way of thinking of things, I guess, when you come down to it.
And kind of going back to something you mentioned a few minutes ago, because this is an audio or an audio and visual medium, but yet being a battlefield tour guide is literally, boots on the ground, physically being there.
Mhm.
So how do you translate those favorite places you have on the battlefield, the places you love to be? How do you translate that into a podcast format?
Again, another great question. The challenge, I think, and this even applies to writing books today too. The challenge today, and sorry folks if you're watching it, if you haven't tuned out at this point and you're still watching or listening, I love you all. But I think as a society at this point, we're kind of using I'm a visual learner. We're kind of using that, I think, as a crutch. Again, when you write a book today, 400 pages of text and prose and all of that stuff, and what does every review say? Are there good maps? Are there enough maps? There aren't enough maps. We need more maps. Never too many maps. I'm a map guy. I need my maps. So I think we kind of use that as a crutch and a substitute for A, not reading, and B, kind of not paying attention. And so when you get into a podcast arena, it can be tough because, now you've got to describe stuff as opposed to just pointing at it or
Yeah.
pulling out the map and saying, here, here's the map. We're standing right here. As you well know, Chris, in a podcast format, you can't do that. And you really got to put your ability to describe things to the test, and sometimes that goes better than others.
Yeah, I'm very grounded. Part of the pun there, I guess. Very grounded in the idea of the power of place and being out on the
Yeah.
battlefield and how inspiring that is. I think one of the things that you're so successful at is that passion translates through in your conversations with Eric, and you can tell you're excited, and you can tell that it's fun, and so even if you're not physically there, you can still kind of get caught up in the spirit of it.
Well, that's great. Yeah, and folks, if like I said before, if you listen to the Battle of Gettysburg podcast, half the time we sound angry. We're not really angry about stuff, but the power of place is so true. I mean, at the end of the day, podcasting, Facebook, reading a book, looking at maps in a book, nothing will ever beat getting on the ground, right? Getting on the ground, walking the battlefield, seeing it, looking at the terrain. Nothing can ever beat that. And just being, as you said, the sense of place, being where this stuff happened, nothing can beat that. And that goes back to what I said before, folks. This medium is great, but turn the laptop off and go to your favorite historic site, and that's what it's really all about.
Yeah. So, what got you to where you are now? I guess this is a question about what's your Civil War origin story.
Yeah, kind of like my superhero origin
That's right.
story,
That's
right?
right.
Yeah. It's a little different than others in that, what almost everybody says is, oh my God, my family took me to Gettysburg when I was 6 and I was hooked and my life was never the same. Almost everybody has some version of that. I really don't have that. I definitely grew up in a house that was more history oriented than some. We watched historical movies and we would go, and kind of in your neck of the woods, the annual summer field trip to Fort Niagara, kind of stuff. So there was definitely, me and my brothers, we would play with our toy soldiers and stuff like that. There was definitely a history bent, a slant, but we weren't like, oh my God, let's just talk about history all the time. We did other stuff. And so I was a little older when the bug really hit me. I got out of college, and for whatever reason, when I got out of college, I was like, geez, well, I got a little more time, I got a little more money, because I'm not a poor student anymore. And I started reading stuff. Now I had always been a little bighorn enthusiast. That has always been there. And eventually that transitioned into reading more about the Civil War. And I hate to sound cliche, because after just going through all this stuff for the 30th anniversary of the movie Gettysburg, I don't know about you, but I'm kind of movied out at this point. But it was the Killer Angels and the movie Gettysburg and that combination. And actually, I saw the movie first and then read the book, and it was sort of that combination that got me saying, "Hey, I want to learn more about Gettysburg." And so I didn't make my first Gettysburg trip till well, I say the mid 90s, like that was only 5 years ago. Of course, now that was like 30 years ago. But folks, we still pretend we're not that old anymore. So I made my first trip to Gettysburg in the mid 90s, which yes was 28 years ago. And at that point, that sense of place just takes over and was hooked. And one thing led to another, and here I am.
Now, I have a terrible Killer Angels secret I'll share with you. I've not publicly admitted to this. So when I was in college, I took a class on the American Civil War from a history professor, and I didn't particularly care about the topic, but the professor was just a great professor, and I wanted to take one of his classes. It was like a running stand-up comedy routine. And of the 5 books he assigned, one of them was The Killer Angels, and I never read it for class. And then years later, when I finally started to get more interested in Civil War stuff for real, I went
Right.
back and read the book, and then sent him an apology.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you know,
Basically, hey, I apologize for cheating my way through your class, you
that's right.
bastard kind of thing. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. And the thing is, the first time I saw the movie, it was good. I was a little disappointed. I was thinking there was going to be more action. I mean, yeah, there are those a couple of those big battle sequences, but you got to sit through a lot of talking to get to it. And I'm not saying anything you don't know. So the first time I saw it, I was a little disappointed that I wanted more action and maybe a little less talking. But then when I read The Killer Angels, that was kind of when the light bulb went off. I said, oh, okay, now I get what this story's about. Now I get, frankly, why these guys are talking so much. And I ended up seeing the movie again and wasn't so hard on the movie and kind of said, okay, this isn't bad. And, then kind of over and over, 10,000 repeated viewings, kind of said, this is pretty good. So that was kind of my hot take on how I got into it, or introduced to it anyways.
And you now have the uh, Civil War facial hair that everyone in that movie wishes they had, which I think is something.
The funny thing is, right? And with the you walk down any street in America today, go into an office building, a store, it doesn't matter, right? Right. You are confronted with guys who have beards like this, right? Right. I mean, I always say, that movie came out in 1993, and people are looking at those beards and saying, oh my God, these are the most ridiculous beards in the world. In 2023, I had to look for a minute to make sure what year we're in. In 2023, the beards you see on the street in the office of any American city are far worse than anything you see in that movie. So I hate to tell people this, but the next time they're making fun of Longstreet's beard is in style, man. I mean, that's what, the CEO of a company is wearing today, all of this stuff. So who would have guessed, right? But
Yeah, the
yeah,
obligatory hipster beard and black glasses, and
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Oh, the hipster beard, and the hair kind of all over. It's just crazy. I mean, I'm like, when is that look gonna go away? It sucks. It's not good.
So at some point after that first visit to Gettysburg, you decide to move there.
Mhm.
What precipitated that decision? I mean, that's an all in move.
Yeah, that's all in, right? But
Yeah.
you just go through Gettysburg, right? And how many people are you going to meet who are like, oh, I moved to Gettysburg. I followed my dream, my Civil War dream. I moved to Gettysburg. I mean, you encounter that all the time. And, I hate to say it, but I guess we were a flavor of that too.
Okay.
My path is different. You know this, but others don't always know this. I wasn't a history major in school. I'm not a college professor. I pursued more of a financial services career. And I moved around a little bit because of that. And so around 1999, 2000, we were living out in Dallas, and I got transferred back to the East Coast. We were going to move to Philly, and then we're like, come on, really? Who wants to move to Philly?
They
You
boo at
know,
Santa Claus. Who wants to do
yeah,
that?
exactly. They're going to throw batteries, and all that stuff. And finally one day my wife said, hey, well, we're going to Gettysburg every weekend while we're up here supposed to be house hunting. Why don't we just buy a house in Gettysburg? And really that was the light bulb moment, and said, okay, done. And kind of never looked back after that.
And so then eventually you go on to become a licensed battlefield guide. How long did that process take you?
Yeah, so we moved here in 2000. And as a tourist, I'd been here and I'd taken tours with licensed battlefield guides, but then we'd moved here, and I don't know, maybe we'd been here about a year and a half or so, and I would go out on tours with battlefield guides, and I'd met a few battlefield guides. And finally one day I said, well, that seems like that'd be a pretty cool way to spend weekends, part-time income sort of thing. And I guess I did well at it, in that I passed on my first attempt. So whatever state I was already in mentally when I started preparing for this, I just read Coddington a dozen times in 2 years, and anything else I could get my hands on at that point, and passed the 2002 exam on my first try. And then became a guide in the spring of 2003. So I was fortunate in that regard. I don't want to say lucky, because I think I work pretty damn hard at what
Yeah.
I do. But fortunate, I was definitely fortunate in that regard. And then you pass the exam and you're like, oh crap, I'm never going to have a free weekend ever again. And 20, 22, 21 years later, that's still sort of come through. But I love it. It's the best job in America. I only do it part-time weekends still, but it's great.
Yeah. Now, I'll take a second to give a shout out to Michelle. And of course, your screen says Jim Hessler, but you are formerly known as Michelle Hessler. Your wife's very involved with the Civil War Roundtable in Gettysburg. She's all in on this too. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, yeah, yeah. Hey, that's she'll be happy to know that you asked about her. She's interested. She is she'd be the first to tell you if she was here. She's not interested at the level that people like us are. She always says, "Oh, I don't care where this regiment was over here, that regiment was over there," kind of stuff. But she finds it interesting. She's into the people and the human interest stories. And yeah, she currently serves as the vice president of the Gettysburg Civil War Roundtable, which was a nice way for her to get involved. I've said I'm divorcing you if you let those people talk you into being president of the round table. And if anybody from that round table is listening tonight, I'm looking at you. So hopefully the aspirations go no higher than vice president, because we're getting older. I want to start doing other stuff. Tired of working all the time. And I see too many people who kind of get president of these organizations and then can't give it up, because volunteerism in America is kind of dying. You don't see people kind of stepping up and saying, "Oh, okay, I'll volunteer and I'll do that for a couple of years." So, but anyways, I'm totally digressing. But that's
That is the nature of the
reversing
business. I mean,
shot.
and I'm sure there are
Yeah,
people listening right now who are involved in roundtables, and they're like president for life,
yeah,
and not
yeah.
because they've become dictators, but because nobody else will step up.
Nobody else will step up and do it. Right. And then, that's sort of the flip side of what we were saying before, telling younger people they got to come out and get more involved in that sort of thing. But we need more retired folks too. People who, do have the time on their hands to step up and do this stuff. Cause you're right. I know a lot of these groups where they've had the same president for, 5, 10, 15 years because the president can't find anybody else to take it. And that's sad. It's
Yes.
sad.
So, going back a few minutes ago, when you talked about passing the guide test, you've been at it for a couple decades now, although you still look remarkably young for having done it that long,
Thank you.
right? That's
Yeah,
oh,
thank you. Thank you.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
How has your view of the battle and the battlefield changed over those 2 decades? Because I'm sure that the Jim Hessler giving tours now is different than the Jim Hessler of 20 years ago.
It is. And, and I don't want to, I don't want to speak for any colleagues or other guides. I've heard some people give similar answers to what I'm about to say. Like, I know when I was in, 2002, training to become a guide, you might take various classes or that sort of thing. Wayne Motts at that time, I distinctly remember Wayne Motts at that time saying to the effect of, at that time, he'd probably already been a guide for 20 years. And he said something to the effect of, what I think is important today is not what I thought was important when I started. And I would echo that. And I think in part because of the guide examination process, which is very much driven on, multiple choice answers and, true, false, yes, no, do you know the name of this monument kind of stuff, because that's the nature of the beast that we have to endure to do what we do. I think when I started, I was more, I don't want to say fact based because then it makes it sound like I'm just making stuff up now and I'm not, folks, but it was more factoids, this, that, the other things sort of thing. And I think over the years, I've become more interested in the strategy and the people and the human interest stories. And I think the longer you do this, you do get better at using the battlefield itself. Rich Gore, who was my guide mentor when I was in training, he had said one time, "Look, they're here to see the battlefield, not you." And I think some people do forget that sometimes. People just kind of go off and they monologue about something that has nothing to do with the battlefield that we're standing on. So I think as you get older, if you're smart and you're good at this, you do make better use of the battlefield than maybe you did when you were first starting out. But it's less of a focus on, hey, did you know that monument was dedicated on a Tuesday when it was raining, kind of stuff, because you realize a lot of people don't care. And again, more the big picture stuff, the strategy, who were the people involved, why were they doing what they do, and some of that just comes with time as well.
Yeah. Now you mentioned people, so that's a great transition to Devil Dan Sickles.
uh,
I fade out, and there he
I know,
is,
I
all
like
by
that.
himself. Look at
Yeah,
that.
look at that.
I love this book. This is your book on Sickles at Gettysburg. I love this book. Why did you choose to spend time with Dan Sickles to write a book with him? Because you got to spend a lot of time with someone to write a book about him.
Well, you do, right, as you well know. And the amazing thing about that Sickles book, I mean, I think that was published 2009. We're recording this interview at the end of 2023. So, 14, 15 years later, I'm still very much embedded with promoting and selling that book. I mean, I still, I'm still doing roundtables talking about a book that I wrote 14, 15 years ago. So I kind of like, I kind of liken it sometimes to like Mick Jagger and Satisfaction, right? And okay, so Hessler's no Mick Jagger. What's he talking about? I'm just sort of making a comparison here. Be like, hey guys, I'm interested in other stuff. And we'll be like, no, Mick, play Satisfaction. We don't want something from Hackney Diamonds, kind of thing. And
Which is a great album, by the way. I thought it was
I
a
haven't heard it yet. I'm waiting for the AARP discount to kick in so I can buy it, kind of thing. But so I'm starting to forget what the question was. Sickles. So how did I get into this book? When I started guiding, so I started guiding in 2003, I just realized I enjoyed telling Sickles stories because, I thought there was a good mix of human interest. There was a good mix of importance on the battlefield, whether you like them or not, good or bad, an important influence on the battlefield. And for the monument and the park people, he's an important figure in the development of Gettysburg National Military Park. So I really thought he touched on, there were things you could touch on before, during, and after the Battle of Gettysburg that were all interesting and all significant. And so, at the time, then I started reading Sickles books that were on the market, and it was just kind of like, yeah, that's not what I was looking for. And kind of decided, started with the Gettysburg Magazine article. And then it was just like, all right, well, I'll keep going from here as I'm kind of compiling more information on them. And the rest, as they say, Chris, is history.
And Sickles is one of those guys. I don't like him particularly much, and I know we're not supposed to necessarily say we like or dislike these folks, but I'm a big Meade partisan, and I think
I
that
know.
what Sickles did with Meade was terrible.
Terrible. That
But
that man, that scoundrel Sickles, he's a very bad man. I know, right? Right.
there, I feel
Right.
better. Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if I could, and that was, I think people have gotten better with it now. Although every time a new Meade book comes out, then somebody will be back to, oh, Hessler, the Sickles guy. But I think in between, now it seems like we have a new Meade biography every 15 minutes. But for a long time, we didn't have any. But when I was writing the book, there was a lot of skepticism, and I mean a lot. I mean like people stopping me on the battlefield and accosting me. Hey, I hear you're writing a Sickles book. Well, whose side are you going to be on? Are you going to attack General Meade? I mean, I dealt with a fair share of that,
All right.
and I was literally astonished because, call me naive, but what I would say to people is, hey, I thought the historian's job was to try to be unbiased. Tell me I'm stupid on that. But what you realized is how many people are very biased. Even people, claim to be historians on it. So I tried to go middle of the road on it. Um, you know, 15 years later, as I said, still promoting, still talking about, still doing interviews about this thing. Um, I haven't learned anything significant since then about Sickles. I mean, I feel like okay, I kind of filled my brain with as much Sickles as it can handle, but maybe some opinions shift a little bit over time. I suppose depending on what day of the week you catch me on with him. But still just an important part of my life and something that opened a lot of doors in my career. And I'm glad I did it. Forever thankful to Ted Savis because again, a couple people were like, "Ew, Sickles." Ooh, I don't want to publish that. And Ted
All right.
Savis, yeah. And Ted Savis was like, hey, let me read the manuscript. And I gave him a chapter and he said, yeah, let's do this. So definitely changed my life.
Yeah.
Maybe as much, if not more than guiding.
Oh wow, that's a bold statement right there. Then,
Yeah,
yeah.
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 Kind of true
But
though.
I absolutely agree with you in that he's a fascinating character. Like Chris White always likes to say he's one of those guys you want to hang out with. You don't believe a word he
Yeah.
says, but it would be entertaining as hell.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but like he's such a giant in the history of the battle in the battlefield. Like you can't really understand all of that without getting into his head a little bit.
You can't. And again, even today, with the Sickles bill creating Gettysburg National Military Park, I'll still occasionally run into some guy who's like, well, that doesn't matter. Somebody else would have done that. And I'm like, You can't do that. You can't, you don't get to say, well, if Neil Armstrong hadn't walked on the moon, somebody else would have. You can't do that just because you don't like the guy. And as you said, Chris, and one of the reasons why I wrote about him at the first place was that, no pun intended, monumental role that he has in the development of Gettysburg National Military Park. And if you think about it, folks, I'm going to work backwards here. Development of the park, the impact he has on the historiography, good or bad, and the impact he has on the battle. I don't know anybody who touches the Battle of Gettysburg in all of those aspects the way Dan Sickles does. Robert E. Lee's here for the battle and never comes back. George Meade's here for the battle, comes back once, I think maybe once or so to visit, kind of thing. But, the only impact Meade really has on the historiography is defending himself from Sickles. And then again, those guys are long gone, and you have Sickles here helping to create the early park. Tell me anybody who has that influence, and I'll bump into people who'll be like, "Oh, Nicholson was more important." I'm like, Christ, really? What did Nicholson do during the Battle of Gettysburg? How can you say that? But people, just because people don't like a guy, they think they can kind of twist the facts, to fit their narrative, which of course, we see in every aspect of society, unfortunately.
Right, right. Now you teed up the perfect line a second ago when you talked about Sickles' monumental impact on the battlefield, which of course then makes me think of Sickles saying the whole damn battlefield is my monument, right? So
yeah.
now you said, over time, maybe your opinions haven't changed, you haven't learned a whole lot, but you wrote kind of a companion volume to this about the peach orchard. So you had the chance to go back and revisit Sickles. Tell me about that book.
Yeah. Thanks. I'd be happy to. So, Britt Eisenberg and I, we co-wrote Gettysburg's Peach Orchard, which was published in 2019. Just a coincidence. It kind of came out on the 10th anniversary of the Sickles book, and we didn't plan that, other than, as you know, Chris, Ted Savis always pushing for books to come out at the anniversary. But
oh, I know.
That's a good point, because when the Peach Orchard book, was kind of announced and was coming out, people were like, wait a minute, you're rehashing Sickles again? And the point with the Peach Orchard book was to kind of say, okay, in the Sickles of Gettysburg book, I focused on Dan Sickles and the decisions of Dan Sickles and the impact of Dan Sickles. 5,000 guys, give or take, fought in and around the Peach Orchard. What if we tell the 4,999 other stories? Of course, again, you can't do the Peach Orchard without Sickles, but Britt and I, we definitely tried to make that story more of a comprehensive view of the battle, view of the property. The Sherfy family, takes a part in that book, and, everything that goes along with that. And I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that, Britt was the big fan of the 105th PA, the Wildcats. So he had stuff kind of sitting on his shelf. I had stuff kind of sitting on my shelf that, the hot take outtakes that didn't make it into the Sickles book. And we kind of said, hey, let's put our shelves together and see what we can come up with. And I really like that book. Sickles is the bestseller. The Jan Brady of my resume is the Pickett's Charge book, which was the second one I wrote. For years, people were like, hey, when are you going to do a follow up to the Sickles book? I'm like, I did. Wayne Motz and I did a Pickett book. So, but the Peach, I think of the three, I think the Peach Orchard is the best written book. And, you can appreciate this, over time, you hone your craft a little bit. You get maybe a little bit more of, what Carol Reardon would tell me, stop using a weak passive voice. You keep writing in that stronger voice, and, maybe you're a little more comfortable with the flowery adjectives or something like that. So I think the Peach Orchard book is a really well written book. And if people don't have it, I hope they'll check it out.
Yeah, I actually have it on audiobook, and it listens really well. So it's
well, even just tonight, somebody messaged me and said, hey, who is this Bob Neufeld guy? How come you don't read your own books? And I'm like, guys, publisher controls that stuff. It's not like we sit around as authors going, hey, I think I'm going to create my own book on tape, right? The industry doesn't work that way, folks, but I couldn't read my own book tonight because, again, as I said at the outset, I'm a little hoarse, but I wouldn't mind taking a crack at that. Me, or William Shatner. I'd really
Okay.
love to have William Shatner read my books. That would just be that would be the pinnacle of my career for me. I'd be like, okay, Shatner doing Sickles, I'm done. You know,
There, yeah.
right, right.
It is a skill to read an audiobook, though. It's not like just, oh, I'm going to pick up my stuff and because I wrote it, it's going to be an awesome reading.
So,
That doesn't
yeah,
work that way at all.
yeah. Well, you know, remember the one somebody said to Mick Jagger one time. Notice I keep coming back to Mick Jagger. Mick, what does paint it black mean? And he goes, paint it black means paint it black. And somebody said, Mick, how do you remember all these lyrics? And he goes, I don't have to remember them. I wrote them, you know, kind of thing. And I know that was a terrible Mick Jagger, but maybe it would be the same if we read our own audiobook. I don't know. I haven't been given that opportunity yet, I guess.
Very good, very good. So as we get ready to wrap up, what advice would you offer our listeners about just kind of staying fresh and learning?
First of all, start with the Battle of Gettysburg podcast.
That's right. I agree.
Of,
And
of course,
where can people find the podcast, by the way?
Battle of Gettysburg podcast is free on all major podcast platforms. We also last year just launched our YouTube channel, Battle of Gettysburg podcast on YouTube, which, you know, like a lot of YouTube channels is a little bit slower getting off the ground, but, you know, we're working on that. But, you know, all joking aside, obviously what you do in the emerging Civil War, because especially the breadth of what you guys do with all the different battles and all the different campaigns, you know, is such a good way for people to get involved. But geez, I don't know. Keep fresh in your learning. You know, I don't know. Don't get set in your ways. Just keep, you know, just have an open mind about stuff, but do be willing to challenge people too. Because as I said at the outset, the good points of social media and podcasting are the bad points, because, you know, you just hear some crazy stuff and it's like, whoa, well, what's your source on that? And I think when you can figure out where people actually get their material from, as opposed to just spewing nonsense over and over on Facebook, you know, sometimes you can learn from that too. So I don't know, that was a crappy answer. I
Yeah.
just
No,
totally
that was a good
totally
answer.
winged
That
that
was good.
one.
Well,
No.
but I think that's particularly important in the context of Gettysburg. And I'm sure you know these folks too, and they're wonderful human beings. But like they do Gettysburg and they do Gettysburg and they do Gettysburg, and they forget there was like a war that led up to Gettysburg, and there's a war that
Yeah,
happened
yeah,
after.
yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah. No, there's no doubt about that. And I think that's a good point. You know, try to look at it holistically. I tend to be more of an Eastern theater guy, you know, which is interesting because I have this whole interest and enthusiasm out West. But when I say out West, I'm not talking Civil War out West. I'm talking, you know, the real American West kind of thing. So I think, you know, what you just said is so true. I would encourage people, you know, if there's anybody listening who is just Gettysburg, 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 just pick a different history topic. Just pick anything that might appeal to you and interest you. And again, different perspectives, different events, different times in history just make you, hopefully, make you a smarter and well rounded person.
Fantastic. So what's on the horizon for Jim Hessler next?
Well, tonight I'm going to watch. No, well, you know, we're still going to continue the podcast. Still guiding, still very much guiding, giving tours at Gettysburg, still doing that. I still have my day job career, you know, which chews up about 50 hours a week. And then I kind of flitter all this history stuff in and around that. I would like to get back to writing, and, you know, it's great to be busy. I'm thankful that people want me to do stuff, but I actually do want to get back to writing. There's a couple projects that thinking about, some with other people and some solo. You know, I've been threatening to do a little Bighorn book.
Yeah,
I've been threatening to do it, folks. I'm threat, you know, do we need another Custer book?
we do.
Uh,
We
we
do.
might. So if I can really find the time to sit down and do something there, I would like to step up to that plate and, you know, take a couple swings at the fastball on that one, and, you know, see what, if anything, I could contribute to that field. Because I'll tell you, man, you think Gettysburg people are hardcore, you spend some time with the Little Bighorn folks. I mean, they can tell you company level, they can tell you where people are standing, they can tell you what shirt a guy was wearing on that given day. It's hardcore, folks. So
Wow.
not for the faint hearted.
Wow. Well, Jim, I wish you the best of luck. And of
No.
course, looking forward to more episodes of the podcast to come.
No, I mean, I just want to say again, Chris,
Oh, yeah.
thanks for the invite, and always a pleasure to see you, my friend, and looking forward to working with you and Chris and Chris and Chris, like all the Chris's of the Civil War, and Dan and Dan and Dan, and all the Dans and John, Eric, and just everybody at the Emerging Civil War. Looking forward to doing more stuff with you guys in the future.
Likewise, the feeling is mutual, my friend. Thanks for being with us tonight.
Thanks for the invite. See ya.
Oh, we got to one more thing to just use
Oh.
scarecrows for. Yeah, we got to finish with scarecrows.
Okay.
There we go. Perfect. So,
There
I'm
you
Chris
go.
Mikowski. Thanks so much for being with us on the Emerging Civil War podcast. We'll see you online and on the battlefield.